the same thing that happened last year. It's the same damn thing I did last year.
Are you the same person you were last year?
I don't know.
That's why you need a tranquilizer?
You tell me.
Nope, it's up to you.
$50 an hour, can't you decide if I should have a pill or not? I mean, you're a doctor. I'm supposed to feel better, right?
Not necessarily.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a great film. We explore its themes, the history, the filmmaking, and the influence it has on us today. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Rocha. I'm a writer, producer, and host and voiceover artist here in San Diego, California.
And before we get into our film, which is continuing essentially our month of Donald Sutherland in honor of this incredible actor, we started with MASH, and now we're moving on exactly a decade later to Ordinary People, which is a lot of a movie. But before we get into that, I just want to point out that if you don't like listening to ads, or you're interested in us talking about some other subjects, you should check out either patreon.com/thecine-files, where there are ad-free versions of the show and our shorts, our watch-alongs, our advisory boards, and a whole bunch of other things, or go to Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe and get ad-free versions of the show and our Cine-Files shorts, which are a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who listen to our ads, those are such an important part of the Cine-Files. If something strikes your fancy, if you want to try out any product in those ads, we can't encourage you enough to do so and to use our code, because by using our code, the advertiser notices that and wants to come back and keep supporting us here on the show. And some of you can't support in the other ways, like financially consistently every month, and we totally understand that. We appreciate you just being a listener, honestly. But if another way you can support and meet the needs of your house or interested in the products that we endorse, that's another way that you can support us here on the Cine-Files as well. So we encourage you to do so. Of course, we're not pushing you to do so. We're encouraging you to do so. Two different approaches, as we're going to talk about in this movie.
And for those of you who are interested in any of those sponsors, there's almost always a link in the show notes where you can click on, go right away to them. And even if you don't want to buy, just clicking on that link actually helps the show out, because it shows that people are following up on some of those sponsorships. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
So, John, Ordinary People. How did you first come to this film?
It takes ordinary people. Look, so here's how I came to the film. As we're recording this, last night, I got back from my Deadpool and Wolverine screening.
That's a double feature.
Yeah, right. No spoilers. I folded some laundry. The Lady Outlaw, who has a new schedule, went to bed at 9 o'clock. I saw that this was streaming on Max, and I was like, should I watch it in the morning or should I watch it tonight? Well, look. This is an Oscar-winning film. Best Picture. It should be able to keep my attention, even if it's from 1980. I popped it on. I didn't turn away for a second from this movie. I was so impressed and blown away and just surprised by this movie and the emotional journey that all the characters are going through. And the fact that this happened in 1980, and we're just now in 2024 having more open conversations about mental health, about how deaths in the family can fracture families, about relationships, conversations about relationships ending. I mean, this must have been so novel in 1980, from what I can remember from that time, that to me, the fact that it still felt topical of us watching it in 2024 and watching, a bunch of actors in this movie who are near their prime, starting their ascent, and that are still in our lives to this day, was just an incredible experience. And so, yeah, dude, I can't wait to talk about the film. I thought this was going to be a dated mess where I was bored about a bunch of white people crying, or well-off white people crying about something. It was completely not that, and it really touched me and moved me.
It's funny. We mentioned this movie earlier this year because we did our season of Scorsese, and we talked about Raging Bull. And obviously, look, throughout the history of the Oscars, there have been what people call snubs, or what people say are big, huge mistakes. And I will stand by what I said when we were talking about Raging Bull, which is that I think Raging Bull is a film for the ages. Like, I think it is one of the great films ever made. And I don't think Ordinary People is that.
Right.
But I don't think this is not this isn't crazy. Like it's not like, Driving Miss Daisy or something where you go like, what? Oh, come on. Yeah. This movie is a profound and powerful movie. It's a really, really well-made film.
And you could argue that coming out of the 1970s, Steve, you and I both remember, I mean, it was such a contentious time coming into the 1980s. This idea of awarding something like Raging Bull or these harder edge type of films, I imagine the Academy was not necessarily jumping at the opportunity to do so, because you have Ordinary People, you have Chariots of Fire. I think it's Gandhi after this, and then it's Terms of Endearment. So these are much more like either domestic fare or elevated fare that doesn't let us, like, doesn't task us with looking at the uglier side of things in our world. And so I'm not surprised that this one kind of overrode The Elephant Man and Raging Bull. I think Coal Miner's Daughter is a good film. I've never seen Tess, but I'm not surprised that it won at this time. But I also think this is one of those films that you could argue deserve to win and make some points versus Raging Bull or The Elephant Man, which I think both were probably deserving as well from 1980.
It's funny to me that we're starting our discussion where we normally end it, but
Yeah,
I actually
fair
think
point.
it's an interesting. I think it's interesting to say, because I think part of the difference is, like, I think if let's say I was 20 something years old and not 12 in 1980, and I went to see both of these movies, there is no question in my mind that I would have had a way more profound and moving experience in Ordinary People than I would in Raging Bull the first time.
Yeah.
Because Raging Bull, you have to reckon with. You know what I mean? Like, it's more you walk out of that going like, what was that? Like, how do I feel? And maybe I have to see it again, and maybe I have to see it again in another decade and another decade and continue to think about it. Whereas Ordinary People, you get exactly what you are supposed to get watching it the first time, because it is exactly what it is trying to be and moves you in the way that it's supposed to move you. You know what I mean?
100% agree with you, brother.
Yeah. And to answer my own question is, I think I definitely watched it at home when I was I probably junior high or something, 12 or 13 or 14 years old is my guess of where I saw it. Totally wrecked by it. And what I didn't realize is, I can't believe it never occurred to me until now. I don't think I've seen, maybe I've seen it once since then.
Yeah.
Is that my first real play was a play about a family dealing with their daughter's suicide.
Ooh.
And thinking about it now, I didn't know that I was totally influenced by Ordinary People, but I 100% was totally influenced by Ordinary People. Like, I didn't, like, it obviously left such a grip on me and how families deal with, or more accurately, don't deal with trauma, that was the first real thing I wrote when I was maybe 20 years old, was that play. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to say I have very little pre-production is an understatement. I have almost nothing. There's just not, I didn't find a lot in my usual, my usual sources are starting with a Blu-ray, then Wikipedia, then maybe IMDb. Then I might tool around the internet a little bit looking for stuff, but usually I have tons of stuff, and here I don't.
Okay.
But I'll tell you what I have, which is, this is based on the novel by Judith Guest, which I did read, and it is exactly the movie. It is one where it's like, I'm not going to talk a lot about the novel because they really followed the story.
Yeah.
And apparently Robert Redford sent Judith Guest a letter and said, I would like to make a movie or a book. And she went, this can't be Robert Redford. And she threw it away. Then she got a phone call. This is Robert Redford, and did the classic, come on, stop joking with me. And finally convinced her that it was Robert Redford. And by the way, she seemed like a hoot. The interviews I saw with her, she just seemed like a cool person. Then the story she told was like, he picked her up at the airport, and she was like, is he going to look like a movie star when she picks me up at the airport, or will he just look like an ordinary person? Picks her up at the airport. She's like, oh no, he looks like a movie star. Everywhere you go with him, that's Robert Redford. The screenwriter they brought on is Alvin Sargent, and frequently I have stories about writers disagreeing with each other and problems with scripts and arguments. No, they totally got along. They had a great time together. She thought he did a great job on the script. She loved the things that he came up with that weren't in the book, and went, oh, I wish I had put that in the book. Like, like they really had a good time with it. Timothy Hutton had read the book and auditioned for it. Apparently, and here's just the one other piece of direction I have, which is that apparently Robert Redford basically told all of the actors, probably including Mary Tyler Moore, to stay away from Timothy Hutton.
Yes.
And make him feel a little more isolated, except for Judd Hirsch.
Yes, that is correct. That's and Timothy Hutton tells a wonderful story. There's a great article in EW where they interview everybody involved in the production all these years later. And Timothy said he had no idea that Robert Redford had done that. And he recalls one particular moment where he went to craft services to grab a coffee. Mary Tyler Moore was standing there at craft services. He walked up, standing right next to her, and said hello. She slowly turned her back to him and said hello without turning around and walked away from him. And Timothy said, like, this, had I known, it probably would have helped me in the process. But while I was doing the film, I can't actually fault Robert Redford for this, because the performance he got out of me, because this is my first big role, the performance he got out of me, I can't separate from that decision. And I probably wouldn't have been able to deliver the performance he got from me, because I was a bundle of nerves the whole time on set, because I was worried that all these great actors didn't like what I was doing. And he said subsequently, Mary Tyler Moore and I became great friends, and she's a lovely person, and everybody involved in the production was very kind to me afterwards, but including Robert Redford. But at that time, he said, I completely experienced all of the rejection from the cast except for Judd Hirsch. Yeah.
And what's your feeling? Because I about this as an actor, because I go, well, I can't argue with the results. It doesn't sound like Timothy Hutton is arguing with the results.
No.
But it also must have sucked. You
Well,
know?
sure. But I think when we're actors, like, we surrender ourselves to the process. And I think when you're surrendering yourself to the process to an actor director who is also directing his first movie, this is Robert Redford's first movie, you kind of trust that he's got you in some way. And I'm sure Robert touched base with him, and he did give him direction and spoke with him on set. But so in a way, he provided him a little bit of respite from that. But maybe in some real lower level, Timothy Hutton kind of sensed or understood as an actor what was going on. And look, it led to an Oscar. So, like, you know, for me, you could do whatever you want to me, aside from Stanley Kubrick or Charlie Chaplin. And if I get an Oscar out of it, you know what? I'll learn to deal with it. And so I do hear you, but I don't think this was necessarily cruel. I think this was about trying to get him to a place, and he's a young actor. And maybe Robert felt this is the easiest way to get him to this place, because he auditioned for this role apparently 5 or 6 times, which was out of the norm at that time for a role like this. And so Robert seen something, and Timothy says it made him feel really comfortable in the audition process. They ate food together while he was auditioning. Like, it was just an interesting process. And so he said Robert had made him already feel comfortable before he got on the set in their relationship, and that helped him navigate the coldness from the other actors on the set, which he did not know was at Redford's suggestion.
It sounds to me, and we kind of knew this from way back with All the President's Men, is that Redford is one of those actors who's born to be a producer, and it sounds like maybe born to be a director too.
Yeah.
You know, because he's directed many great films, you know, after this one. Yeah. And I think he has a real, it sounds like he has just an extremely curious mind, and a mind that's passionate about a new project. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say, by the way, I just think about that moment you described with Tim Hutton and Mary Tyler Moore is like, to understand the craziness of casting Mary Tyler Moore in this film, and to think about what that must have felt like for Timothy Hutton. So she's, you know, Laura Petrie in among my favorite sitcoms, The Dick Van Dyke Show.
Right.
And then that's a huge hit and hugely popular, and it is dwarfed by the popularity of the Mary Tyler Moore Show in the 70s, where she is America's sweetheart. And she is the most beloved, kind, associated with joy and humor and all of that stuff. And so I go, like, that's who I want to cast in this role in the movie is crazy. And then I also think Timothy Hutton grew up with this woman as America's sweetheart, and she gives him the cold shoulder at coffee in the morning. Like that, how is that got to feel?
It's got to be tough to navigate all of it. And it must be super tough for Mary Tyler Moore to do it as well. But look, this is acting, and this is the big time. And so this idea of like holding hands and kumbayaing in a process isn't always going to be the method. Maybe much more nowadays, of course, but certainly back in 1980, I think it wasn't maybe necessarily the process all around. But I'll tell you how, I don't know if you have this in your notes, Steve, but from what I read in the article as well, that Robert Redford cast Mary Tyler Moore after he saw her walking in the morning on the beach in Malibu by herself. She had a very sad look on her face, and he like watched her walk up to him, and in that moment he said, I knew she was my Beth. I knew she was
Wow.
the character, the actress that I wanted to play it. And when I reread the book, I read the book with her in mind the whole time. And Mary Tyler Moore said she was really excited to do the role. It's stepping out of her comfort zone, but she said that wasn't the reason. She said the reason was because the story itself was fantastic, and it really spoke to me with what was going on in my family. So I think that's the gift of this movie. And I feel like almost like we're giving final thoughts already, but like the gift of this movie seems to be, from a lot of people who it really resonated with, is that it reflected their family in 1980. And I think that's one of the big reasons why it was able to overcome Raging Bull and these other movies that you could argue artistically are better films, and certainly with poignant stories. But I think there was a connection that a lot of critics and voters must have had to their own families watching it play out the way it played out in this film, which respected each character. You could argue Beth is kind of a villain, but you also have to wonder why. And I think the film makes you question why, makes you wonder why, because it doesn't turn her into an evil villain, but it certainly turns her into an antagonist at times in Conrad's healing. So I think this is, and the relationship with Calvin. So I think it's fascinating that this film was able to resonate with so many people, and Redford making the right choices here in terms of casting.
It's funny. You're right. We are in this weird way giving what we normally say at the end of the beginning. But now I want to say one more thing, which is like, there's no question that Raging Bull has this realism, just this like, these are just people, particularly De Niro's performance, where you're like, but so does ordinary people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, it is right there in like, this is how people are.
Yeah.
This isn't like there are elements where it's like, yes, it is a story, but it feels real for me.
Yeah. And at times I think you can look at Raging Bull and these are like characters, right? And not that you're not delivering phenomenal performances, but Pesci's character is, kind of a funny character. And then he had funny I amuse you.
Funny, I've got to amuse you.
But like, until he has the moment where De Niro beats him almost to death, which is horrific. There's a little bit of a character here. And same thing with De Niro, putting on the 60 pounds, so like you see that these are clearly performances that are geared for a certain type of effect in that movie. This is a much more stripped down, raw movie where you get real performances from these actors conveying real characters in a world that feels real to most people who went to see this film, as opposed to Raging Bull, which feels like from obviously set in another time, but feels like another world completely,
Well, and to be very honest, if I look at the worlds of Ordinary People and Raging Bull and compare them to the world that I grew up in, my world, although it was way more Jewish than the world of Ordinary People, was a hell of a lot closer to Ordinary People. I recognize a lot more of that than I do in Raging Bull.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more on the pre-production real quick, Steve, and that is that a number of studios rejected this movie and rejected Robert Redford directing this movie. The person who didn't was Barry Diller. Barry Diller, who was at Paramount Pictures at the time, he's the one that fought for this movie. He was the head of Paramount. Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg told him not to do this movie. They don't do this movie, but it was Barry Diller who overrode both those guys, and he told Robert Redford, because he said, it's Robert Redford directing the movie, that's an automatic yes. And he said, Robert, we're going to leave you alone. Go and make your movie. So none of the studio was involved in this. They weren't there on the set. They weren't messing with him.
Wow.
They left him completely alone to do the movie. And Robert says that was a massive, massive reason why he thinks he was able to get the movie that he got in the end with this film. And he says to this day how surprised he was by the response still to this movie, how it still resonates, how it won all the awards. He's like, I thought our movie was just going to be one of these films that gets buried about families. And I had no idea it was going to resonate in the way that it did. But Barry Diller is a massive reason why this film was able to come out the way it did. And Redford was able to direct the film that he did.
We always talk about, it's funny, I was literally just listening to you on the Geek Buddies on a spoiler review of a movie from a long time ago that I finally watched last night.
Oh, yeah.
Which was Aquaman, the second Aquaman, which is terrible, by the way. Just
not good.
Horrendously awful. But as you guys are, pointing out many of the things that are wrong with the movie, is that it's actually really, really hard for things to go right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's and Barry Diller just giving this first-time director the space
Yeah.
to go make your movie. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here having this conversation.
Yeah,
You know?
100%. 100%. And his studio wouldn't have won a Best Picture, which I
Right.
think that's how you really
And make a lot of
solidify him as
money.
a smart man. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
They made a lot of money on this movie.
Yes,
Speaking
they
of which, now would you like to jump into the
Yes,
film?
let's do it.
So we start off, and again, it's black, white titles, no music, silence, ordinary people, which says something about where this movie is going to go. And then you get into Pachelbel's canon, beautiful piano music, and we just have the scenic shots for a while of the horizon down to the lake, which obviously is going to come important later. It's autumn. We see trees and countryside and gazebos, and just we're getting a sense of this world. And then we hear a choir. We come into a student choir being conducted by like a teacher, and the camera moves along the students, and there is Timothy Hutton in, as you mentioned, one of his very first performances.
Yeah, and it's an interesting because I also noticed Elizabeth McGovern in this shot as well, and this was her first film. They Redford convinced her to not go to Juilliard immediately and do this film instead. She had been accepted and she was on her way, and he stopped her, and they were gonna cast someone else. I can't remember who else that they were gonna cast, but they ended up casting her. But Timothy Hutton, it's an immediate stark. He stands out from everybody. The hair is disheveled. The eyes are gray underneath, it looks like he hasn't slept in days. Like he looks like what you would think is someone who is going through a really emotional time in his life. And the fact that they're singing this song, this uplifting song with these lyrics and what have you, you just see him stand out in ways that from everybody else. And I think it's an incredible introduction that gives us maybe at a subconscious level what this kid's inner emotional state is at the time that we see him here for the first time in the movie.
So much about this film is about the not being able to talk to the person that isn't who you worry isn't quite okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And this shot, I think, does exactly as you say, which is like, is he okay? It's like something, maybe he's not okay.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, it's hard. We've all dealt with worrying about our friends or our family or someone and going like, what do I do?
Yeah.
How do I do something? And it's really hard to figure out.
And
of course,
it's really smart too, Steve, because this is a choir. What's a choir? It's a combo of different voices from different octaves, right? So you're trying to bring that together to be a symphony. And we start and end with this song in the movie. So to me, I think there's a little bit of symbolism here from a first-time director,
Absolutely. And of course, we realize that he really isn't okay because the next thing that we see is him waking up in bed from the fevered dream. Of course, we're going to spend a long time waiting to find out exactly what's going on, but clearly something's going on.
Yeah.
And then we cut from there to a play at it's not quite community theater. It's maybe some regional theater and people laughing. And you're like, what's going on? Like, what is this? The movie is not in a hurry to get there,
Yeah.
Which very much, I think it's funny. I think it's so interesting to me that we had 1970 Donald Sutherland, and now we have 1980 Donald Sutherland, and we have the 1970, Robert Altman craziness of a film.
Yeah.
And now we have the 1980 really restrained Robert Redford film, like I think we got a huge range here. And what we see is Mary Tyler Moore, who plays Beth, in the audience, laughing and doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing in the audience.
Yeah.
And Donald Sutherland playing Calvin is asleep and is woken up by the laughter because he wasn't paying attention.
And she doesn't call him out on it. He's just plays it off or whatever. And it's a window into that relationship that we don't know at the time if we're watching the movie for the first time. Like, you don't really know how to put that in context till you end the movie. And I love this actor on this. This is like a community theater for a small community, right? It feels like, because he's like looking into the audience to see if they're laughing.
Yeah.
And so there's that kind of thing where they're putting on plays and everybody knows them. And when they walk out, they say, oh, he's putting on some weight, the main actor. Maybe you shouldn't do these roles. And so there's a sense of like, oh, you're watching Tom on stage. It's like, no big deal. This is what he loves to do or whatever. And we're supporting him, right? The Donald Sutherland thing is fascinating to start off with him being asleep, because I think there's an undercurrent throughout this whole movie that he's not happy with this life.
Absolutely.
Right? And the fact, we get to the ending and what happens, but like there are hints throughout the whole movie and signposts throughout the whole movie that show you that he is secretly not happy with this life either. And it isn't until the breakdown that you really hear how unhappy and how he's finally noticed how unhappy he that's been constructed. And I think it's fascinating too, because Donald Sutherland, Robert Redford wanted him to play the Judd Hirsch role, but he said he didn't want to do that. He wanted to play the dad, and he showed up on set with a mustache because he says, I am unusually ugly, is how he sees himself, right? How Donald saw himself. And I showed up on the mustache because the mustache gives me something to hide behind, like Orson Welles with the fake nose and stuff.
Right.
And so they were sitting on set. Robert Redford walked to him and he said, is it Calvin, right? Calvin would never wear a mustache, would never have a mustache. And so Donald had brought a electric razor just in case. And when Robert went to go get food, he went into the bathroom, shaved his face off, and came back on set without the mustache. So that's what we see now in the Donald Sutherland performance, which I think is completely correct.
It's totally correct. Well, this guy shouldn't have anything to hide behind.
Yes.
If he had something to hide behind, he would hide.
Right.
Right. Like, no, I think that's absolutely correct. By the way, I had seen that originally Redford wanted Gene Hackman to play the dad.
It was between him and Gene Hackman. Yes, correct. Yeah.
And that the studio couldn't come up with the money for Hackman. And I love Hackman. You and I can sing Hackman's praises all day.
Yeah.
I'm really glad he didn't play this part.
It's a completely different movie with Hackman. He's much more the centerpiece, right? You got to, Donald plays him much more subtly. And I think it really is effective in the film.
Well, and Hackman can do amazing things, but I don't know that he can play lost, you know, and unsure and all of those things the way that Sutherland plays them.
Yeah, it's different because in Songs for My Father, he does a really moving job as the son of this dad, but it's almost like Big Fish in that the dad is so big, so much bigger than the son that he has to kind of dim his light in order to allow his father to shine. I think this is a completely different role, and I don't know that he would have necessarily, his approach to that kind of character would have necessarily worked as strongly as Donald's did. So I think you're right there.
We are exiting the theater, and there's small talk with friends, and this is one of the things about this movie is, and again, it's interesting that we just did MASH. Yeah. In MASH, there's tons of incidental dialogue as well. And part of it is just sort of the realness of the world, and there isn't so much like this line or this story is important. It's more just the experience of the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah. This movie also has tons of incidental dialogue. And by that, I mean dialogue that could be taken out and you would still completely understand the story.
Right.
It's not connected to the story. It's just people chatting.
Yeah.
But the experience is totally different because in this movie, you have the feeling that there's all this stuff under the surface that nobody is talking about. So the incidental dialogue is pointing out what we're not dealing with.
Yes.
Which is very different from what's happening in MASH, you know?
Yeah. Control. Yeah.
And then we're in the car driving, and then there's this moment where they ask,
what was it you were thinking about?
When? But we don't actually get answers.
Yeah.
There's something going on, but we don't know what the thing is that's going on.
Right.
We head into the garage, we go inside, they go upstairs. It's all silence. The silence I found in this movie to be just palpable.
Yeah. Constantly. Yeah.
And Donald Sutherland, Calvin, sees the light under the door, and Beth just goes to her bedroom. She doesn't pay attention to the light that's under the door. Calvin knocks on the door. Conrad, who was not reading, grabs a book and pretends to be reading.
You okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah. How's the show?
Trouble sleeping?
No.
You're sure?
Again, it's sort of small talky and it's awkward. And then Cal says,
Have you thought about calling that doctor?
No.
Well, the month's up. I think we should stick to the plan.
The plan was if I needed to call him.
Yeah, okay.
And chooses not to push it.
Mm.
When I saw this the first time,
you take this one, yeah.
I was not a dad.
Oh, when you saw the movie the first time, you were not a dad. Yes.
Now I'm not only a dad, but frankly, I'm a dad with a kid who has mental health struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And figuring out, trying to understand when to push and when not to push, because you always worry that I'm going to push you into the mental health struggle.
Yeah.
But I know that doing nothing, we're never going to get out of it.
Yeah.
You know, that's a big thing in this movie is problems do not actually solve themselves. most of the time.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to be the Timothy Hutton person in your own upbringing, because I know my father struggled for many years on how to deal with me, and
Yeah.
there's a side of it like he didn't have the emotional vocabulary to deal with me because of how emotional I was. But in retrospect, understanding those were mental health issues that I did not know were mental health issues,
Right.
um, I applaud my father and mother for even more for trying so hard, and I climbed out of most of them eventually, certainly late in life I did, but I put them through a lot with some of my emotional swings, some of my, self-hatred, some of my stuff. And you see, and the guilt I felt of the wasted potential at such a young age when I failed out of college my first time around after everyone had said I was going to go be, a lawyer or a diplomat or all these things because I had such great grades and I was so into world politics. And so there was a lot but I wanted to be an actor. So there was a lot that was slamming into me and I felt nothing but guilt and shame and embarrassment and disappointment. And it just built up for years, and it would come out in the strangest ways. It's why I joined the military. And so I just watching Donald Sutherland's performance, Calvin, like trying to navigate Conrad's place, especially because he probably senses Conrad's lying to him, but he doesn't want to
Of course.
push it. And so he's trying to be caring and supportive, but also suggesting certain things, and what have you. And so I feel nothing but sympathy for Calvin throughout the entire movie for how he's because he loves his son so deeply, and he's trying to help him navigate these times. And it's not easy. It's not. I envy any father that has to deal with it. And like I said, it gives me a whole new appreciation for my dad and what he tried to deal with.
Well, and then he leaves, they finish their little small talk and he goes out of the room. And the minute he's out of the room, you see Conrad's face fall
Mm-hmm.
because he was putting on a show, because he had to show, because he loves his dad.
Yes.
I mean, there's this weird thing
Yeah.
where I know you're worried about me.
Yeah.
And I know you're worried about me, and I'm trying to show you that I'm okay. So I'm pretending to be okay so you don't worry about me. And then you're trying to support my pretending to be okay thing. And we've had an entirely bullshit thing,
Yeah.
but that's how humans deal with each other,
Yeah.
And I think, and again, we spoil every movie that we go into, and obviously we're going to spoil this one. But like one of the interesting things that is said much later in the movie, is that Conrad is really a lot like his mother.
Yes. Yes.
And I think one of the things that Beth does is she is playing the role of the perfect, happy, upper middle class, woman in this culture.
Yeah.
And Conrad in this moment is playing the role of the son that's okay for his dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though he's the farthest thing from okay.
Yeah.
We have a top-down shot of like the iconically perfect breakfast. Like it's the one that you saw in the cereal ad or whatever. And Conrad's still laying in bed. And again, there's just kind of small talk. Yeah. And then we finally ask about Conrad and we call up to him.
Gone.
He doesn't answer because he's sitting on the edge of the bed. And in my mind, and I don't know what you see, is that he's again preparing for the role. He's backstage, getting ready to go out and perform.
Oh, that's a great point. Beginning with a performance to introduce this relationship at a local theater, and then we see them playing roles in their own lives. That's actually, I had not made that connection. That is great. But he's sitting on that, preparing before he walks out on stage for his parents. Yeah.
Well, and actually what you brought up from the very beginning that I didn't think of it is, what is Conrad doing when we first meet him? He's singing in the choir.
Yeah.
He's playing a role,
Yes.
like now I am playing the role of the tenor in the choir. That's my job.
Right.
So he comes downstairs and says good morning and says he's not hungry. And you say, it's French toast. It's your favorite. And dad does what I do, which is like, hey, pal, come on, breakfast. Remember, most importantly, because you're trying to create the energy that you want your kid to feed off your positive energy.
Right.
So you manufacture positive energy. And like all performances, John, if you're doing a good performance, it is true.
Sure.
But it's also to some degree a performance, and other people can sense it. And as soon as he has said, "I'm not hungry," Beth immediately takes his breakfast away and tosses the French toast in the sink.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
You can't say French toast.
And I'm like, yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
French toast seems perfectly fine.
Yeah, but this is, and this is again, when you rewatch a movie like this, you see these, in essence, I'm rewatching it with you as we talk about it. You see these, that he's giving you the context of the relationship of all three of them, right? Because the dad is trying to give the energy. And let me tell you, as the son on the other side of that stuff, we do see it. We understand what you're doing, but we can't force ourselves to fake it to make you happy. And that's where we're at when we're in those. My dad tried to do the same thing a number of times. He would try to be happy about it. Then my dad would go into the angry place. But it's all coming from a place of love and frustration and a desire to help you climb out of it because it's love. Hers is different, right? Because she's insulted that she went through all this effort to make the food and he won't just play along, right? And that becomes the thing throughout the whole movie. She is making all this effort in her mind to keep the family together and to get things back to normal. But Conrad won't play along with the roles that she wants. She's in essence trying to direct this family play, and he will not take her direction and do what she wants him to do on the stage. And that's what you see. And the other actor in the play is trying to encourage him to do what she wants, and what they want. And so it's an interesting little scene that plays out here. And I love that Redford has the close-up of the French toast going into the drain, which is just perfect.
Yeah, because again, French toast does keep.
Not bad.
I think there's a thing, particularly I will say, like for my grandparents' generation and more, and then also for my parents' generation, and less so as generations go on. But particularly in this class of people, there is a right way to live.
Yes.
You are supposed to, you belong to the country club and you play golf twice a week and you do this thing and you go to this event and you're on the PTA and you support this charities and things are very prescribed.
Yeah.
And the contract with that reality or with that society is that if you do all these things, then you are by definition happy.
Yeah. Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And so she has made the perfect breakfast.
Yes.
And he has rejected it.
Yes.
So fine, I will throw it in the trash.
In a public way. I think if it had been just him and her, maybe there's a different reaction. But because it's with Conrad in the room as well, or Calvin in the room as well, then I think there's a different reaction there. It's a much more, she's embarrassed by it all and frustrated by it all.
Well, I mean, we're going to get into it, but appearances matter to Beth.
Oh, big time. Right.
Yeah, that is a big thing for Beth. And then Conrad says that, he's getting picked up for school from some of his friends, and Cal brightens up and he's so excited about it.
Why is it great?
I don't know. I don't see the old gang much anymore. I kind of missed them.
And you get this sense of Calvin loved the friends of Conrad and hanging out with them. He almost felt like he was part of the gang. That was exciting.
Yeah.
But that relationship isn't there anymore. And Conrad exits, and Calvin, then you could see Donald Sutherland's such a good actor, is that he returns to his breakfast, which he is supposed to eat, and then he eats it mechanically,
Yes.
because that's what he has to do now.
He's playing the role. Yes.
He's playing the role. Outside, he gets picked up by his friends. Again, it's all small talk about studies and swim team. And, I don't even know what they're all talking about. But what it's really about is Conrad in the backseat not talking.
Yeah, throughout this whole thing. And there's two notable actors in this crew of friends who are still working today. Obviously, Adam Baldwin stands out the most. Stillman, who, of course, was in Full Metal Jacket as Animal Mother. He was in, I forget where he's the My Bodyguard. Right, he was in My Bodyguard. Recently in still working episodes of SWAT, American Underdog, 911. He was a series regular recently on The Last Ship for about 4 years in the middle 2010s here. But you've seen him in a number of things, voiceover, acting wise, consistently working. I think he was the lead in DC Cab, if I remember correctly, with the great Mr. T. Yes, he was Albert Hockenberry. And the other actor here, which I think is of note, who plays Lazenby, is an actor we saw recently in The Greatest Showman. If you remember that movie, Frederick Lane, who played the mother of the woman of Michelle Williams in Greatest Showman, but he was recently in 7 episodes of Elsbeth as a recurring character, a lieutenant there. So still working. Westworld, 2 episodes of Westworld. The Eyes of Tammy Faye, that recent film with Jessica Chastain, and a number of TV shows and films throughout the years, consistently working throughout, and certainly a part of the SVU CSI situation, and 11 episodes of Lost. So you guys might remember him from there as well. And I did not recognize him at all, Steve. I mean,
Me neither.
Baldwin is very recognizable, but
Yeah.
Frederick Lane did not recognize him as a young man at all in this movie until I did the research for it. And I was like, what in the hell? And so it was just incredible to see that. So good casting job by the casting director in this movie. A lot of actors who worked for numerous decades.
So they're driving along, and then they pull up to a railroad track, and the barrier starts. And I think already up to this point, we've seen Robert Redford has a very sure hand as a director. But this moment in particular is a purely filmic moment, which is that the camera's on Conrad, the barrier is coming down, the bells are ringing, and it is tense.
Yeah.
Like you feel the build to a disaster. That's
Yes.
what I'm feeling emotionally. And it's done entirely with the shot of Conrad's face.
Yeah.
And the shot of this train barricade and the sound. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And then the moment that the train comes barreling through, it is sudden. It is shocking. It actually reminds me of the moment in Brief Encounter where she almost throws herself in front of the train. And the train comes barreling by. And I wonder if this was in Redford's head. But what is this moment? What do you feel like has happened here?
To me, I think, because actor directors are a really interesting breed of directors, right? And I think what Robert Redford is doing is like, look, I'm not going to give you the full story yet, but I'm going to let you experience certain things to prepare you for the full story when I show it in flashback. So here's a PTSD moment, right? And remember, we're coming out of Vietnam. The term PTSD is starting to become something people use to describe the reactions their fathers and brothers and husbands and loved ones came back with from that war. And of course, it happened in World War II and all the wars, of course, but certainly it became a pop culture conversation after Vietnam. This is 1980. So the idea of what PTSD must be like, and I think this is an actual PTSD experience where something is triggering the memory, and this loud noise feels louder because he's already in a state of unsettledness from the interaction with his mom and his dad. And boom, now we have this moment. And this is Robert also dragging us as the viewer into the mind of Conrad as he's experiencing this. So we are prepared for it down the road in the movie.
For me, I have no evidence. There's no evidence of this at all. But for me, the thought in Conrad's mind is how easy it would be to throw myself in front of that train.
Absolutely. I'm sure that's a part of it as well. Right. I could end it all real quickly.
Yeah. Just I'm 6 feet away.
Yeah.
I could just do that. And then this would all be done.
Yeah.
So the train passes, and then we're driving a little further, and then they start calling out to this high school girl on the side of the road, which is Janine Pratt. That's Elizabeth McGovern.
Yeah. And as I said, and we know Elizabeth McGovern, another actress who's still working today, of course, recently a part of the Downton Abbey crew there, and someone we saw in the 80s in so many movies, like She's Having a Baby, which is the Kevin Bacon one, which is one of my favorite John Hughes films ever. She was in the original The Handmaid's Tale movie. She was in The Bedroom Window, Native Son, and of course with Robert De Niro in Once Upon a Time in America, Racing with the Moon, Ragtime. And as I said, this was one of her first movies. And, she doesn't work all the time, certainly through the 90s, a bit sporadic in her work, 2000s, a bit sporadic in her work. And it wasn't until Downton Abbey that people kind of reappreciated Elizabeth McGovern all over again. But she's one of those leading ladies in the 80s for these younger films with people like Nicolas Cage and Kevin Bacon and others, where she held her own, and De Niro, of course, where she held her own with these fantastic talents. And sometimes people forget how important Elizabeth McGovern was to the 1980s. And by the way, this almost wasn't Elizabeth McGovern. As I said, she was going to Juilliard. It was Robert Redford who convinced her to wait a few weeks to shoot her scenes before she went. Robert Redford had been looking, according to Timothy Hutton, he had been looking at Marie Osmond. of all people.
Ooh.
People forget Marie Osmond in 1980. That was a massive get to get Marie Osmond to be in your movie. It would automatically have brought all the eyes from the Donnie and Marie show, which for those of you who are too young to remember, those two were massive, massive stars in the 80s, 70s and 80s. So that would have been, this is an interesting movie because Anne Margaret was also looked at for the Mary Tyler Moore role. So Anne Margaret, Gene Hackman, and Marie Osmond is a completely different movie than what we got with these actors. So yeah,
I don't think you could have. I have no idea how good an actress Marie Osmond was in 1980. I was certainly watching every single episode of Donnie and Marie at the time. That was like peak viewing for Steve Morris then. But having Mary Tyler Moore, a TV sitcom actress in a serious role, and having Marie Osmond at the same time, that just seems like too much to me.
Possibly. Yeah. I mean, obviously, clearly Robert felt that way as well in the end. Yeah.
But clearly Conrad is certainly aware of Janine as he watches her from the car window. And then we're at school and we're just listening to class and Conrad's not quite paying attention and gets asked a question. And I do want to bring up, they're talking about Jude Frawley, and the teacher asks, do you think he was powerless in the grip of circumstances, or could he have helped himself?
I don't, powerless? I guess he thought he was, yeah.
In a weird way, that's the whole movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, can you help yourself or can you not? Are you powerless in certain, what is your fault? What is your responsibility? Yeah. All of those things are things this movie's going to wrestle with.
Yeah, for sure.
And we see him just kind of lost, I think, during his day at school. He ends up at the payphone, calls a number. You can clearly see that he's nervous.
Hi, this is Conrad Jarrett calling. Conrad Jarrett. Dr. Crawford at Hillsborough Hospital gave me your number. And,
Oh, yes. I'm with a patient now. Can you call me back at 2:15?
I'm like, well, why did you answer the phone? You're not supposed to answer the phone when you're with a patient. I know that.
I don't think I'll be free.
I think, and I'm sure you've experienced this, of it took everything he had to call this number.
Sure.
And with this one little bit of obstacle, can you call me again? It's like, I don't think I can do that. I did it. This was everything I had to do this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I called the suicide hotline in 2016, if they had put me on hold for longer than maybe 10 minutes, I don't think I would have stayed on the line, and I don't know what would have happened.
Yeah.
But it took, it felt like I was lifting hardened concrete in my body to dial the numbers. And I'm not being dramatic. For those of you who've experienced it, you fucking know. It is a massive dark hole, and climbing out of it takes so much effort just to make a call. You know, people are like, reach out. And it's like, yes, it's great to say that, and it's important to say that. But when you've been in the grip of it, it is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. And it's not because you don't want to live. It's because takes so much massive effort. It is literally like pushing a massive boulder up the hill to do it. So if you can do it, facing any kind of obstacle or rejection or hold can be a dangerous time. And I think these people are trained to make sure that people don't wait on the line for a long time, because people can just hang up and go, it's too much. I'm going to do it, And so I think this was a great scene to show you a mirror into this. And it's a great way to introduce, for now, voice-wise, Judd Hirsch, because of the rapid-fire delivery that he has and the questioning of it all. Oh, okay. Yeah. But you see that him reaching out, though, without his father's prodding, without his mother's prodding, I think shows you that Conrad does have a desire to live. It's just that he doesn't know how to navigate it, because this is only hours after the train sequence. Yep. So there is clearly some piece of him that wants to fix this and figure it out.
I think one of the things this movie does best is demonstrating exactly what you just described, is how hard it is to crawl out of the hole, to go to just take those, what seem like small steps, make this phone call, but they're not small steps. They're big, hard steps. But he does at the end say,
hello.
That's okay. I'll try to call you back. Thanks.
Yeah. So that's a step. Then he's in swim practice with his Coach M. Emmett Walsh.
The great M. Emmett Walsh. I mean, what? You don't need me to tell you about M. Emmett Walsh, do you? I think we all know that this man has been in our lives for numerous decades in so many great ways. I mean, Blood Simple, Raising Arizona, all the way up to the TV shows and films that he's done. And I think he just recently passed M. Emmett.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, this year, actually, 2024. Lived to 88 years old, y'all. I mean, of course, Blade Runner, a show that we've done, a film we've done together here. Of course, in The Jerk, which I think a lot of people have asked us to do as well. But he was on Righteous Gemstones recently, Knives Out in 2019. So consistently worked all the way through the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s. And one person that I think is a good reason to advocate for an Oscar for Character Actor of the Year. Like, I really do believe that. There are so many of these guys and ladies who stand out as character actors and actresses that I think they deserve some recognition because they never get it. They never get recognition other than work for the work that they do, you know?
There should just be it should be called the Tobolowsky or something where there's just an award.
The Stephen Tobolowsky Award, yes.
And we just have a celebration every year of just these great people.
Yeah.
And every year we give away a different one and highlight the breadth of their careers, you know?
Yeah. And of course, we covered the Civil War series, which he is one of the voices on.
Oh, yeah.
For 9 episodes. So,
yeah.
And speaking of the Stephen Tobolowsky Award, which I think is a great suggestion, Steve, Roger Ebert was quoting as saying that he created the Stanton-Walsh rule, which states that no movie featuring either Harry Dean Stanton or M. Emmett Walsh in a supporting role can be altogether bad, but he took it back in 1999 when M. Emmett Walsh appeared in Wild Wild West. That's what he said. He broke the rule. It did not work anymore. But I'll tell you how long M. Emmett Walsh has been around. He appeared in the pilot episode of the Bob Newhart show in 1972. And of course, we recently lost Bob Newhart this year as well, just the last a couple of weeks. So that's a man with incredible breadth of a career overall and a hell of a resume.
Absolutely. We're back home. We're looking at a dinner table. Again, it is the perfect dinner table, framed in the perfect dining room, and the doors are just on the side. One thing I have to point out is that people have heard me say this on the podcast many times. There's certain films that came up in film school all the time. And I've also mentioned that the most important class I had in film school that many people who went to USC for about 25, 30 years would say is this teacher, Bruce Block, who taught this visual expression class, who wrote an incredible book on visual expression in film. And this shot was in that class. And what he talked about is that one of the things you can do is that we have this widescreen format. So everything is in landscape, right? So we, as opposed to if you tilt your iPhone the other way and you're in portrait mode, well, that's a vertical frame. And what Bruce Block talked about is that just because you have a landscape frame in the shape of the film is you can change the frame by putting things in the foreground, blocking things out and create a new frame. Yeah. And so what this movie does it throughout the entire film is put things in frames or uses things which Bruce Block calls surface divisions, where there's like someone standing in a doorway where you see a wall between two people because one's behind the doorway and one is just outside the doorway. So there's all these little visual cues that are telling you that things are not right in this family, Anyway, so I just thought I'd point that out.
That's a great thing to point out, brother. Thank you so much.
Again, what are we talking about? Small talk. Unimportant talk.
Yes.
Mechanics and rip shirts and then there's this mention of this girl from the hospital from Skokie, whose name is Karen. Yeah. We don't go into it because Mom, as soon as we start talking about the hospital and this girl Karen, changes the subject.
Conrad, do you want me to sign you up for round robin at the club?
I haven't played in a year.
Well, don't you think it's time to start?
Because, John, these are the things you're supposed to do. There's the round robin in the club, and there's this event, and you're supposed to be in choir, and, that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, she does not want... in her way, she is trying to get him to snap out of it. And for her, and this is what I think when you watch this movie, and this is why you cast someone like Mary Tyler Moore, who is chomping at the bit to play a role like this, right? Certainly she enjoyed becoming an icon for women and feminism in the 1970s, which I think was super important, still echoes to this day her work in the Mary Tyler Moore Show. But this was something that was such a challenge for her. And watching her play these moments where she's not one-dimensional. She's not. You can tell that when you hear the name or when you hear about the girl, clearly, Mary Tyler Moore is playing a emotion of, no, we're not going back to that. No, let's gloss over that, because to her, that is going back down into the wormhole that they clearly were scarred from with Conrad's attempt on his life. And so that brings her more pain and fear. And so she's afraid of that. So let's get you back into this. Play the role. And to me, as I was watching Beth, I saw a woman who was forced to be this way from her father, and it's too late to change the programming. And her mother as well, I imagine, which we see later, the interaction with her and her mother, which is a great window into their relationship and how she sees psychiatry versus how Beth sees psychiatry. And so to me, I think you see these moments, and a really gifted actress brings it out, that there's much more going on other than her just wanting to shove everything under the rug. You can tell there's a fear here and an inability to deal with it,
Well, and in the next moment, after she's saying, hey, it's time to get started practicing for your round robins at the club, she turns to Calvin and says,
Also, Calvin, we have to go to the Murrays on Saturday. I couldn't get out of it. It's Clark's birthday. I bought him that book on wine.
Did she try to get out of it?
No, not at all. And if she
not.
did, it was really like a glancing try to get out of it. Yeah.
Does Calvin want to go to this party?
No.
100%
not.
Yeah. And so this is the thing. So I think one of the interesting things is how much social obligation were you brought up with, or fits in with you. And for me, as a younger person, it was a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt that if I had to go to every birthday party, every play opening, every film shoot, if someone had a thing, I was going to go there and be there, because that was the lesson I learned from my family, was like, you show love by your presence. You show love by showing up.
Yeah.
And then there was a certain point in my late 40s, probably, where I started to go, I don't actually like that particular thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to that. Particularly, there was an era where we were at a lot of bars. You were there too, in Hollywood, for various people's birthdays that were packed body to body. And I hated them. And I just, somewhere in my 40s, I went, do I have to go to this?
Yeah. To give you a window into our Steve and I's group of friends, like, we didn't ask to have a 75 person group of friends. Do you know what I'm saying? It was a couple of people or a few people who acquired multiple groups of friends, shoved us all together. And look, for the most part, it worked. When we were all at parties, it wasn't that there wasn't drama. You're going to have 75 people. There's going to be drama with certain people. But having that many people in a friend group means that you really have your social calendar packed all the time. And for me, what I struggled with early on, which I had a couple of really strong conversations with people in our group, was that, like, there are days and nights where I don't want to go to this stuff. And it's not personal. Again, I didn't know what my mental health issues were. I wasn't aware of it at the time, right? But I felt at times an overwhelming sense of dread going to these things. I've never been comfortable in my body since I left the military, since I got out of a basic training in 1990 rather. And so for me, I always struggled with appearances, and then add on to it the expectation and the amount of time. The problem is that a lot of our friends who don't have mental health issues, and it doesn't mean that they don't go to therapists or whatever and still have stuff to work out, but don't understand that element of introversion that a lot of us have. I'm a half extrovert, half introvert. It's overwhelming. And some people don't get it. And it's hard to talk about even more because people don't get it. So you struggle with this. So yeah, what Steve is talking about, I had many, many nights where I felt the guilt from people to go to these things that I didn't want to go. And even to this day, sometimes I feel this thing of like, well, you should drive up for this, or you should come up for this, or you should go to this. And The truth is, it's not that I don't want to necessarily or don't respect you. Rather, it's just that the weight of doing it is overwhelming. Where it comes easy for you, for some of us, it's not quite as easy. And so I've always struggled with that, as Steve has pointed out himself, kind of like the overwhelming nature of it. So yeah, I hear you.
And I think the thing that really relates to this movie is for Beth, you just have to do all the stuff.
Yes, you have to do all the stuff. And I think for Beth, you have to do all the stuff or her entire world comes falling down and she can't deal with it. I think
Right.
she is one or two things away from becoming Conrad herself. You know?
Oh, yeah. No, she is right on that, because I think she was doing all the stuff.
Yes.
And then this and things were okay. And then this horrible tragedy happened.
Yes.
And then this secondary thing, really super scary, almost tragedy happened.
Yeah.
And she's it's so funny. The Finding Nemo wisdom of just keep swimming sometimes is actually the right thing to do. It's like, just keep swimming.
Right.
Sometimes when it's just keep swimming and don't deal with the shit,
right,
it is exactly the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
It's like she is just going, just keep swimming. We got to go to this thing and we're going to do the round robin and we're going to go to the play and we're going to play golf and we're going to go away on Christmas. And that is what we do, you know?
Yeah. And I want to add this because this is Mary Tyler Moore's quote about Beth in this EW article that I found. She says, Beth was a victim. I shared this with Robert Redford, who told me in our first meeting that the non-relationship Beth had with Conrad was the mirror of the non-interaction Robert Redford had had with his own father. So she says, Beth made me think of my father, Mary Tyler Moore's father, and his rigidity. I imagine a bit of him and me in this performance, along with my own tendency to want everything to be perfect, set the table for bringing Beth to life on film. So I think that's another part of this role that spoke to Mary Tyler Moore, is that she has been this person. She knows this person. Not quite as cold as Beth, but certainly she understands this idea of perfection. You know, she was great in the Mary Tyler Moore show. She was great in the Dick Van Dyke show. She was great, all these things. But people don't know the meticulous preparation and probably stress that she put herself under to get things right, because she sensed the importance of what she was doing, you know?
I think those are great points. Well, and I also think it points out that people think either frequently that acting or writing and creating things as an artist is just total pretending and it's not you at all, or that is entirely you and you're just saying the truth. And it's like, no, it's rarely just totally bullshit.
Yeah.
And it's rarely that I am just being me.
Yeah.
It is usually I am using parts of me to create the role, you know?
Yeah.
Conrad is in bed, tossing and turning as he dreams or thinks. We see this sailboat.
Give me your hand!
There's yelling.
Bucket!
And the dream ends.
Yeah, what's your thoughts on these boat sequences, Steve? Because these are where the moments feel a little dated and set obvious. You know what I'm saying? Because this looks like something out of the Truman Show. It's like that kind of staged boat.
Well, and that is what it is. And I agree with you. It's shot. This is one of the few things, most of this was all shot on location.
Yeah.
This is shot on the Paramount backlot in the tank.
Yeah.
And it looks like it. The camera is close. We don't see any backgrounds. We don't have any sense of scale. We don't understand where we are. Yeah, I totally feel. But I also go, this is also the image in his mind.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So it doesn't throw me out of the movie, but I totally agree. It looks, cheap.
Yeah.
Conrad is outside this building. We don't quite know what's going on. And you could see every step is, well, I'm going to go this far.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure I'm actually going to go all the way. I will get in the elevator. I will push the button, And it goes to your point of all of this is hard. Every one of these steps is hard.
Yeah.
And then he starts talking to himself.
Oh, hi. How are you? Oh, fine. I'm fine. Just couldn't be better, really. Oh, terrific, yeah.
And what is that? That's him preparing for the role of a patient to a psychiatrist.
Yeah. And I love he gets to the door and he buzzes for Dr. Berger, and then Judd Hirsch pops out of a door behind him from the wrong place and invites him in. Can I just say I adore Judd Hirsch in every single thing he's ever done?
You and I are charter members of the Judd Hirsch fan club. I agree with you 1,000%. And clearly Robert Redford was as well. He cast Judd Hirsch in this movie because he saw an episode of Taxi late one night, and he said, "This is the guy I need. I need a guy who can deliver rapid fire dialogue and doesn't care about being an asshole." And
Yep.
that's why he cast Judd Hirsch
Wow.
in the role. Yeah.
He's so great. And I will say right now, and I honestly cannot remember if this came up when we were discussing Good Will Hunting. My guess is that it did.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's any Good Will Hunting without ordinary people.
Oh, that's an excellent point.
Because this is the prototype of Robin Williams and Matt Damon. This is it's all there, you know.
Damn, that's actually a really good point. And I'll tell you, as we said with other people who were cast in the movie, Robert Redford went to Richard Dreyfuss first. This is what Redford said. He said, "I thought Richard Dreyfuss should play the psychiatrist. So I called him and asked, and he said, 'I can't talk right now. I'm having a nervous breakdown.'" So I said, "Well, I won't bother you. Hope it all works out." And that's essentially the end of the Richard Dreyfuss attempt to be a part of the site. But that's the one casting I think could have worked. Although I don't think Richard's ego would have let him play, you know, a lesser character than the main lead. So, but still, I thought, but I love Judd Hirsch in the movie. I think it was the perfect choice for this movie.
The thing about, I love Richard Dreyfuss, and he probably would, I'm sure he's a great actor and probably would have been great. The thing of Richard, you know, it's like we talked about Gene Hackman. I don't know if he cannot bring some of the strength. Yeah, I just don't know that he can do that. There's always a neurotic element of Richard Dreyfuss. There's always something a little bit, just from that phone call, "I can't talk, I'm having a nervous breakdown." Like there's always that little bit of intensity in there. And the thing about Judd Hirsch's performance is he is so 100% completely solid in who he is.
Yeah.
You know, he's just settled down into this role.
Yeah, and I think you're 100% right. And he brings a different energy to the movie, right? It's a much more quizzical, looking for answers, pounding away at the problem type of energy, right? It is not the hands off. Is it okay if we do this? Can I try? You know what I'm saying? And it isn't the cold energy from Beth. It is a much more, let's get to this. What's really going on? Pulsating through it. Not initially, obviously, but it becomes that as the film goes along. And that is a huge reason why I enjoyed Judd Hirsch in this movie and was the right choice. You know?
Well, and I think too, this is, you know, we're in a very white American upper class professional world.
Right.
And Judd Hirsch is New York. He's not Midwestern. He's no bullshit. He's not about playing roles, and he's just about like, let's get to the straight shit. And frankly, he's very Jewish. And I think the Jewishness is critical. I mean, part of it is I'm Jewish. And, you know, I said earlier, like, this is very similar to my world, except not nearly enough Jews. And I'm like, well, here we go. Thank you. We need that wise Jewish guy to come along and help save the day. So, I like that a lot.
Don't we always?
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
How long since you been out of the hospital?
A month and a half.
Feeling depressed?
No.
On stage?
I think that question shows so much understanding. By the way, I find it fascinating that he lights a cigarette because we're not in that world anymore.
No, 1980.
It used to be people just smoked.
People nervous, treating you like you're a dangerous character.
I think this is like, oh, this guy gets it.
Yeah.
I know. I'm going to ask the question I already know the answer to, and you probably already know mine, but have you felt on stage nervous because people were treating you like a dangerous character?
Yeah, especially, yes. Yes. As in, you know, when you, but I felt much more people who understood and sympathized and cared for that after I, you know, nearly did it in 2016. I found much more of my friends who were very conscientious about it, which I very much appreciated. Only a couple people were like, where you had to put on an act in order to make them feel comfortable about it, you know. So,
I feel maybe I have a broader interpretation of this because the first level I think is, are you dangerous? You know, but then there's also this thing of, you know, that people are looking at you because like when my dad died or when my marriage was ending or, you know, like, and you have that sort of people put the kid gloves on and they're worried about you're dangerous to them, to the world, like anything could happen. And so they're trying to treat you in a certain way. And that feeling, it's so hard when you feel people wanting to. It's a line from Brief Encounter where she says, "Isn't it terrible people trying to be nice to you?"
Yes.
And it's like, yes, there is a terribleness of everybody knows that I tried to kill myself. Everybody knows that I am out of the hospital. Everybody knows about my dead brother. Everybody knows about all of these things. And now I'm on stage, you know?
Yeah.
How long were you in the hospital?
4 months.
What did you do?
I tried to off myself. Isn't it down there?
Doesn't say what your method was.
Double-edged super blue.
Which is a knife.
Mhm.
So we know that he slit his wrists.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that we have 2 movies back to back where we're talking about suicide and the method of suicide.
Oh, yeah.
And they are as different could be.
Suicide is not so painless in this movie.
Yeah. And as he's asking these questions about family and friends, you can see Timothy Hutton bouncing. Like he can't keep his body still.
Yeah.
Goes through everything and he says, no, everything's fine. School, friends, teachers, all that stuff is fine. He's like, so why are you here?
Yeah. That's a
It's
great
long.
moment. So why are you here? Yeah.
It's a long pause and you can see him struggling for words. And then he says,
I'd like to be more in control.
that is a fascinating line.
Why?
So people can quit worrying about me.
Again, like there's so much in those 2 lines. I want to be in more control so people don't worry about me. And I'm on stage, but everything's fine, you know?
Right.
There's a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah. People don't look at the other side of it is that people who survive these things sometimes have to take on other people's feelings in order to help them feel better about their situation. And so that adds more weight to what you're already navigating. And, you know, that's the tough thing. It was the hardest thing to tell my mother that I did it.
Yeah.
I didn't want to hurt her. My mother's one of the best people that ever walked the earth. One of the sweetest, most loving, gentle, caring people, funniest people that ever walked the earth. And it took me a long time to tell her that I had almost done it, you know? And so, because I didn't want to hurt her and I didn't want to take on the weight of her pain, you know? And I eventually slipped it into a conversation organically. And we dealt with it, but it was weeks removed from when it happened. And so it made it easier to navigate. And she was incredibly supportive. And especially when I was seeing the 2 therapists, she was very supportive of it all. But it was a conversation I dreaded constantly.
Of course.
I want to hurt her. So this idea that he's talking about, you know, I want to be in control so people stop worrying about me is absolutely true, you know.
So I think talking about the thing is often way, way harder than not.
Yep.
Like it is so hard. I remember when my dad got diagnosed with ALS and then I had to call friends and say, hey, my dad's dying of this terrible disease.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't cried when he got the diagnosis. I was in the room with the doctor when he got the diagnosis. I hadn't cried driving home. I hadn't cried. I cried when then I had to say the words.
Yes.
It's so there's this thing about time, and that's what this movie is a lot about that of like, no, you have to say the word. You have to go in.
Yeah.
You are not, you think you're feeling the feelings, but you're not until you say it, until you go into them. And then you got to really fucking feel the feelings. And then maybe you can move past it. It's like and I think that Judd Hirsch moves him into this.
Yeah.
So beautifully, you know.
Well, I love what Berger says. He goes, oh, yeah, I like control. Let's try that. Like the way he is so matter of fact about everything is so essential to Conrad's healing, you know, because he's not afraid, Berger, to talk about this with him. He doesn't treat him like he's a porcelain doll. He absolutely talks about it with him and gets him to confront it, you know, and that's the thing that he pierces his attempts. This is a high school kid. He pierces his attempts at trying to put up walls around the thing that happened. And his bouncing around like Timothy, and by the way, Timothy Hutton, what a fantastic performance. And
It's
these little
great.
moments, right? As you said earlier, him and Judd were the only two people. Like, he was the only relationship he had on set was with Judd Hirsch, the actor, and Judd speaks so glowingly about Timothy, and Timothy says how Judd had really helped him and guided him as an actor and advice for the future. But like, this is where the magic in the movie really is in terms of a relationship and an acting back and forth, and the way Timothy is letting. And by the way, people may not know this, and Judd Hirsch spoke about it in this interview. He had just lost his father before he did this movie, Timothy Hutton. So he was navigating his own, journey of loss while playing this character. So I think there's probably a lot of that he drew upon as he was creating this character. And these emotional moments of bouncing up and down, I bet that's all organic, in the moment kind of energy that he's playing with as an actor, and that Robert is letting him play and that he's capturing on camera.
There's honestly no false moment in Timothy Hutton's performance in the whole film.
Not a second.
I think it's so believable to me. And I think Judd Hirsch, it's like a fucking masterclass.
Yeah.
Because there's so much there, and there's so much he's not saying. And he does this perfect version of, I'm not bullshitting you. I'm being 100% straight, but I'm not. And you can see him all the stuff with this patient.
Yeah.
And he can see not to say anything about any of it. You know what I mean? Like, he sees, I see what's going on here. And this is a process. I'm going to take some time. And so we do hear that, that part of what has happened is that his brother died in a boating accident, which is, we go like, oh, that's what I saw in that brief dream sequence.
Yeah.
And then again, we go back to this idea of control that you mentioned.
Well, I'll tell you something. I'll be straight with you, okay? I'm not big on control. But it's your money.
It's your money.
I just think that's so like I work for you. And what's interesting is that we're not going to find out why he's not big on control until much later in the movie, but it is going to come back.
Yeah.
Because the reality is you can't control life.
Yeah.
That is a fool's mission. You have to accept what's happening. That's what it is, And then we set up for his appointments and that he might have to miss some swim classes. And this whole time, Timothy Hutton has multiple times said that he doesn't like this.
I don't like being here. I got to tell you, I don't like being here at all.
And Judd Hirsch just kind of goes, okay, it's fine. You don't have to like this.
Yeah.
The shot of mom rolling napkins into tubes and putting circular napkin holders on it. There were napkins in tubes at my aunt's house or my grandmother's house. Definitely.
Yeah. And growing up, when we first started out, obviously my parents were immigrants. I was born here in Philadelphia. We moved to the inner city there, or the inner city adjacent areas of Arlington and Alexandria there, with a lot of immigrants, fellow immigrants, families. When we moved to the suburbs when I was 9 years old to Dale City is now very much more diverse, much more African Americans, much more people of color, Latinos, Asian people. But when I moved there, it was not that diverse. It was mostly, I would say 90% to 95% white. And so occasionally I would go to dinner at these houses with the white families, and I saw the tubes wrapped up with the napkins and the silver. That is not in my house. We had napkins we pulled out, and then we put the fork and knife on top of the napkins. That's it.
Yep.
And not even like cloth napkins, like, paper napkins. And so it was a whole experience to see this form of life and how people behaved in that form of life and the rigidity of it. So when this scene happened in the movie, I almost kind of went back to that time.
It's really weird. And we have to keep reminding people, it's like the way that you grew up, that's just the way you grew up.
Yeah.
There's all these other places they do it different ways. And when someone goes from one world to the other, it can be really uncomfortable because you don't know what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And you feel like you could look pretty dumb because you don't know what you're supposed to do. And it's like, well, if you brought, if you had brought me to your house when we were both 12 or something, I wouldn't know what to do. I'm sure there'd be all sorts of things that were different from what I grew up with.
Yes. Right. Exactly. Yeah. And ditto. And vice versa. Right. Of course.
Yeah. But I'm sure we would have had a lovely time.
Possibly.
So, and then it's so weird. Again, it's small talk, but it's small talk about someone whose sister died. And they're just talking about where did she die? And I'm like, this is a kid whose brother died is right here. And we see him out of focus behind Donald Sutherland. And then Donald Sutherland kind of makes a joke at the end and Conrad laughs at the joke. Yeah. And I just think that what the movie does really, really well is tracking his journey, of slowly coming back to life in some ways. And just this little laugh is like, oh, there is joy. There can be joy there, and Dad sees it.
Yeah.
And the first thing he says after that little smile with Dad is,
I went to see Dr. Berger.
So even though he said, I don't like this.
Yeah.
It helped a little bit,
Yeah.
And when he says he went to Dr. Berger, Mom looks up. I don't think she's happy about him going
She
to see
is
Dr.
not
Berger.
happy about it. You can tell. I mean, Mary Tyler Moore does this really fun thing with her lips when she purses them or is like completely upset, like doesn't want to say it, but is kind of horrified at the situation.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
I didn't know you made an appointment.
And you can see the tension in her body, She's just super rigid. And then because he senses her disappointment in him seeing the doctor, which he didn't really want to go to in the first place.
Right.
He starts backing out. Maybe, it's too much money. It's twice a week and swimming schedule and blah, blah, blah. And Dad is continually going, it's fine. It's fine. You have to do it. Yeah. Even the fact, by the way, that his office is in Highland Park, which I don't know what these neighborhoods are, but my guess is this is not the same as their neighborhood.
Probably not. No.
Yeah. He is getting talked down to by his swim coach.
I see you yawning. I see you come late. I don't see you having any fun out there.
I don't even think it occurred to him at this point that he should be having fun.
This is such an unusual coach that I love so much in this movie because he clearly cares about Conrad. He cares about him. And he's like trying to say like, well, why are you doing this if you're not having any fun? And I think this is so great. You can count on your hand coaches who would say this to kids like, are you having fun? Because it doesn't matter if you're not having fun. They just want to win, most coaches. So they don't care if you're having fun. They care if you're going to be able to perform when the bell rings. And so I love that this is such a different approach to a high school coach.
I agree. I totally agree with that. And along with that, he is so ham-fisted in the way that he's talking to this kid. Because first he asks if he's on tranquilizers.
Right.
And then he says,
Did I ask you before if they gave you shock out there?
Which I love that he's saying, yeah, you have asked me this before.
Yeah.
Yeah, you asked me. Yeah, they did.
And then the last thing he says to him is,
I'm no doctor, Jared. I would never have let them put electricity in my head.
It's like, thanks, coach.
In his own messed up way, he's trying to connect with him. He clearly doesn't have the emotional vocabulary with which to connect with him. Yeah.
We're walking through school, and there's Elizabeth McGovern, who introduces herself.
You stand behind me in the choir.
Oh, I do? You do? Is that you?
You have a lot of energy.
And he is, of course, awkward and uncomfortable, and the other girl kind of makes fun of him.
Yeah.
But it's nice. It's Halloween. Beth is handing out the perfectly decorated caramel apples to the cute little kids who are trick-or-treating.
Yeah.
Of course, they're perfectly decorated caramel apples. And B, caramel apples were the worst thing to get at Halloween, in my opinion.
This side of pennies.
Pennies, absolutely.
Rye pennies is number one worst thing you get in Halloween.
Yeah.
But caramel apples, yeah, man.
I don't want your caramel apple. Give me something in a wrapper.
This is not a candy.
It's dressed up fruit. Come on.
Yeah, I don't want a healthy candy. Get out of here.
You know what I've been thinking? That Christmas in London would be like something out of Dickens. We've never done that before, right? Christmas in London.
Maybe we shouldn't plan to go away right now.
And what we find out is that they always travel for Christmas.
Yes.
And he's trying to hint about why she should not want to do this thing. And she is not hearing it.
Purposely. She wants to run away from the problems. We'll run away as far away. Or let's go to London and we'll shake it out of him. Like, or we'll go together. Like, you know what I'm saying? Later, what she says to him, like, why do you always include him? It's like crazy. So, yeah, this is clearly the first attempt of her to kind of like run away from this completely.
I think it would be good for him, too. Anyway, isn't it time we got back to normal?
So you laughed. You had a strong reaction to that line. What is your reaction to that?
People are obsessed with this word normal. And I think we discovered, and then again, 1980, brother. It's fascinating watching this movie in 2024 to see some of the stuff that's brought up here that we're still talking about to this day when we talk about how to progress in society, how to navigate expectations and mental health issues in society. This idea of normal, the obsession of normal. There are plenty of people who think there is a normal, and there are other people who know clearly there's never been a normal and never has been a normal. That was just a mass delusion people had put themselves under to believe there was a normal. Because usually normal is when you're hiding what's actually your real feelings about something, what's actually going on, because you want to keep appearances. And so this idea of what she sees as normal is anything but normal, because it's all lying to yourself and ignoring the problem until you can't ignore it anymore or you snap, And so getting back to normal. There is no normal because she can't even participate in the normal. That's the interesting thing about Beth throughout the whole movie is how possibly aware but purposely unaware she is about her contributions to this not being a normal situation. She's doing what she thinks is normal in order to achieve some state of normalcy that cannot exist anymore because of the death of Buck. And that is what she constantly slams into as she's trying to achieve some semblance of normalcy, quote unquote, in their lives.
I think we have a really hard time with change. We have a hard time seeing change and adjusting to change. Is that I think you can be in a space of time where everything's kind of working the way it's working, and you've figured it out. Like, okay, yes. I go to work at this time, and then I do this, and this is where we eat, and this is how we're planning for the future, and this is what we do on the weekends, and that's all, and it feels pretty stable,
Yes. Yeah.
And then something changes, and you go, well, I just want to go back to that thing. Everything made sense then.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's changed. You can't, like we were just talking about when the quote unquote urban family was at its peak with 70 friends. Well, that doesn't exist anymore.
No.
You know what I mean?
No,
like that's gone. So the impression that we're still rolling around at these giant parties and all these events, they don't happen anymore.
No.
And that was hard for me to go like, oh, this thing that worked this way doesn't work that way anymore.
Right.
And so adjusting to what is the new normal is hard, and knowing that normal is only going to last a certain space of time and then it'll change again. Is that the level of delusion that Beth has of like, no, your son died and your other son tried to kill himself.
Yeah.
This is not, there's no going back. There's only going forward. Right. There might be new stability you can find at some point, but you can't just go back.
But but I think it's also important, and you're 100% right, Steve. And this is what makes Beth so fascinating, and why Mary Tyler Moore's performance is so great here, is that you can sense throughout all these interactions, there is a person here who is damaged, and that she probably did everything she was supposed to do.
Exactly.
Her parents told her to do. She put away her dreams. She put away what she wanted. She married the man that could provide for her, and she had 2 kids. And when we see the flashback later on with her and the firstborn son, it's Buck, right? That's his name, Buck?
Yeah.
She looks so happy, laid back. She's enjoying the fruits of the world she was told to create. And when the death of Buck happens, and her son's suicide attempt, her other son's suicide attempt, everything is shattered.
Yeah.
So in essence, the things they told her to do did not yield the results she was told they would yield, and she cannot adapt,
right,
and improvise and troubleshoot the situation and figure out a new normal to exist in, or she doesn't want to exist in this new normal at all, because that's not what she was raised to do. And so that's what you see in her, is this resistance to it, because she wants to go back to the fantasy that was there. Because if she doesn't, then everything she sacrificed of herself to achieve this quote unquote normalcy is in vain.
Right.
And that's just too much sometimes for certain people to deal with. And we have to have grace for those people as much as we have grace for the people who deal with the mental health issues that come upon them, you know?
Well, I mean, this is, the more you delve into everybody's perspective, the harder it is to paint someone as just the bad guy.
Yeah, that's what I love about this movie. We get to see that,
And so she's really pushing. She thinks it's important for them to go on this trip and bring things back to normal. He thinks it's important that Conrad just started seeing this doctor and he needs to stick with it.
No, if he doesn't go through with this now, he might change his mind.
All right, then if he changes his mind, maybe it's not something that was right for him to do.
Oh.
well, this is what's really interesting about this movie now.
Yeah.
Is, we're 44 years later into the world of people accepting therapy and mental health issues, and that being a part of just normal health.
Yeah.
At this time, it was fairly shameful, the idea of seeing a psychiatrist. And you were supposed to just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If you're sad, then just stop being sad. What the hell's wrong with you?
Yeah, get over it. We all got stuff. We all got stuff.
We all got stuff. Yeah. And that's her attitude.
Yes.
And
I bet there are a lot of people who went into this movie to watch this movie thinking they were going to have a fun Mary Tyler Moore experience, and they were watching their lives and her performance reflected back at them, like at themselves. I bet there are a lot of women who went to see this movie who are around that age that the character is in the film that Mary Tyler Moore plays, Beth, and saw themselves reflected in that character and had to have a reckoning possibly, or ignored it, and were maybe even mad at Mary Tyler Moore for kind of tricking them in some subconscious level to come and see this movie by being in it.
Yep. So it's another day. Beth comes home. She's got this green package. She walks into the house. She heads upstairs. She stops at a door and knocks, and there's no answer. That's Conrad. He's apparently not home. And then she goes to this other door. You could see the emotions on her face. And I think the moment she goes in this other door, you go like, oh, this must be Buck's room.
The hesitation, she has to go in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And she goes, and it's covered in trophies and books and school posters and sporting equipment. And you get a sense of who this guy was just from the room. And she comes in, she looks around, she sits on the bed. And then Conrad's coming home, and he heads inside, he heads up the stairs, and we see him out of focus just outside the door. And this is what I'm talking about, this idea of surface divisions, is the door creates a division between the two of them. And he scares the crap out of her.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Don't do that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And the scene is so awkward after.
I didn't think you were here.
I'm sorry. I just got in. I didn't know you were here.
I didn't play golf today. It's too cold.
How was your golf game?
And it's like neither of them have any idea what the other one's talking about. You know what I mean? Like they're just so uncomfortable near each other.
Right.
And he says the things that he's supposed to say. He says how he's doing on the swim team. He talks about tests, and again, it's all totally, totally disconnected.
Yep. Completely.
And then she says, I bought you 2 shirts. They're on your bed. And I don't know why that means something to me, but it's just like, I am continuing to control the image that you put out into the world. I bought you new shirts.
Well, it's like the French toast.
Yes.
I am supposed to do this, so I have bought you 2 new shirts, and they're on the bed, and I do, she gets accused of not loving him later on in the film. I think she does love him. I just think there's too much pain at the loss of Buck that she is not willing to confront and overcome in order to love him fully again. And I think what you said earlier, we'll touch upon when we get to probably in the second part of our conversation, but like the fact that Conrad is so much like her is why she kind of pseudo does have a like undercurrent of hatred towards him, because he is doing what she can't do, which is to confront his issues and try to find help. Buck was more like Calvin, who she saw as this gregarious, outgoing guy, probably when he was younger, and accomplished and what have you. And that's why she admired Buck, because in a way it reminded her of her love for her husband. But Conrad, as Calvin says later on, never really needed them. He was very self-sufficient in that way. And I imagine so is Beth. And clearly, Beth is willing to put herself back together for appearances at whatever situation they're in. And I think that's where you see this undercurrent in a psychological way in their relationship. That's why they can't speak in that moment, because he catches her with her guard down in that room with reminiscing about Buck. And he's ashamed because he's carrying the death of Buck because he thinks he caused it. And so watching his mother being there, sitting in that room, reminiscing about the brother that he feels he killed, how can they possibly bridge that without one of them having an incredible amount of therapy to understand how to even open that subject matter up?
It's not, and it's both the brother that he thinks he killed, and it's also clear evidence that she loved that brother more.
Yes, 100%.
Because she's sitting in his room.
Right.
Showing emotions and being emotional about this. And I'm right here.
Yeah.
And you're not doing that. And it's fine. And again, obviously we're going to talk about this later, but like there's the line, Judd Hirsch's way of talking about this issue, because he's like, my mother doesn't love me. And I'm angry about my mother who doesn't love me. And his response is something like, no, you're angry because she doesn't love you the way you want her to love you.
Yeah.
It's like, is that, and I know, because it's come up before, I know you love this song as much as I do, which is the line from Hearts and Bones by Paul Simon, where he says, why can't you love me for who I am, where I am? And she says, because that's not the way the world is, baby. This is how I love you, baby.
This is
how I love you is like, that's not the way the world is. This is how like, that's all we are. We can love, but we can only love in the way that we can love.
And we're not going to love everybody in the same way.
No.
And yes, she loved Buck more. Well, I don't know. She loved Buck in this way because Buck did need her more. Buck made her feel wanted. Buck was the pride. And look, he was tall, strong, strapping, blonde. Like he was everything you're supposed to be in this kind of waspish world of existence. And so she probably bragged about him to all the mothers. She probably made fun of the other sons for not being Buck, like scoffed at the other moms for thinking they'd possibly be in Buck's league. And now she's lost that playing chip. And she has Conrad now. And she doesn't have the pride in him that she had in Buck.
Yeah, because status is a huge thing for Beth.
Yes.
Huge thing for Beth. And I'll say something, this is a weird thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to try to figure out how to articulate it in the right way, is like, there is a correlation between people who are fucking up in life and people who are fucked up. But that doesn't necessarily mean that people who aren't fucking up in life and seem to have it all together aren't just as fucked up.
Yes, 100%.
It's correlation, not causation. In other words, the fact that you are fucked up does not always cause you to fuck up things in life.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and we've known a lot of these people too, and people like Beth, where they're working so hard to not fuck up at anything in life that they are fragile as a tiny, they're as fragile as a piece of glass, just waiting for something to come along and break them into shards.
Yeah.
We're driving off to the party. And again, they joke about, let's go to the movies. But guess what? They're going to go to the party.
Yeah.
So they go to the party. It's all upper class small talk. It's all this person's dress and a little happy birthday. And we talk about business and everyone is in suits and there's past hors d'oeuvres and, you look wonderful. And, it's all this stuff and it's all bullshit,
Yeah.
And then there's this moment where Calvin sits down next to this woman on the steps who's obviously a friend.
Yeah.
How's Conrad doing?
He's great. Just great.
Which is a lie.
Right.
But, I mean, you have to lie. I mean, I'm not saying that's a criticism, but...
Right. But I also think he does think he's great in that he's trying to reach out for help, right? So in a way, he's trying to put a good face on it, but he does think he's right in saying so,
And she talks about her kid and that they haven't seen Conrad very much.
No, he's There's a doctor in Highland Park that he sees a couple of times a week, and that kind of cuts into his social life. He's great, just great.
And at the moment that he says that, we cut to Beth, who turns because she heard this.
Is he still having some problems?
Because when you said you've seen the doctor a couple of times a week, well, that must mean that there's still problems.
And you're fucked up.
Oh, no, nothing like that. No, just somebody to talk to, that's all. Just kind of polish off the rough edges, that's all.
And it is funny because this is 44 years. I don't think this conversation goes the same way today, where mental health is like much more in the fore, you know?
Yeah.
And then this moment, so he's kind of dug himself into this small hole,
right?
And then an arm comes around him through the banister of the steps as Beth comes to literally come take control of the situation.
Yeah.
How you doing, darling? Is he falling asleep on you yet?
No, he's great.
Because one of the other underlying threads is that Calvin drinks too much at parties. That's another little thread that's going on. I don't know if it's Redford's idea or Mary Tyler Moore's idea, but reaching through the railing of the stairs is just such a great little bit of direction.
That was fantastic.
Yeah. So we're driving in silence.
You drink too much at parties, Calvin.
I'm not drunk.
Why did you tell Annie Marshall that Conrad is seeing a psychiatrist?
I don't know, why not?
How do you feel about him telling Anne Marshall that Conrad is seeing a psychiatrist?
I think this is how can I say this? This is Calvin coming to terms with what's happening with his son, who he loves.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't feel ashamed that his son is reaching out for help. To him, this is a good thing that he's reaching out to a doctor. And remember earlier in the movie when she says, "Oh, I didn't know you'd made an appointment," and he's trying to back out of it by saying, "Well, if it's too much money, blah blah." It is Calvin who's like, "No, don't worry about the money.
Yeah.
We're going to deal with it. Like twice a week, great, $50. Okay, all right, understood. But we'll deal with it. We'll figure it out. Don't worry about that. Right? It's about you getting better. It's about you surviving and figuring out how to navigate this pain so you can come out the other side." And so when he's talking to Annie, that's the name of the character on the steps there, played by Cynthia Burke, he's saying, he's just casually dropping it because to him, that's not a negative. To him, he's like, yeah, he's doing good. He's seeing a doctor. This is good, right? But for Beth, this is a source of shame because in some way, I think Beth feels it indicates that she failed as a mother. And certainly a lot of mothers felt this way when their kids went to go see therapists when it became a thing in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and what have you. Now, there are mothers who feel they are failures if their kids have to go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And so that's what motivates Beth. And so Mary Tyler Moore's performance here, she is so cold and angry, frustrated. Why? Because you improv'd the scene when I, as the director, told you, you know what you're supposed to do. Why did you improv and talk to her on the steps and tell her what's going on with our son? I am the director of this play, not you. You do not get other lines. You don't get to bring in other actors into our play, and that's essentially what she's saying to him. You violated our trust. You violated our code. You embarrassed our family.
Well, for one thing, I don't think people hear that kind of thing very easily.
Come on, for most people, it's a status symbol right up there with going to Europe.
Well, I thought your blurting it out like that was in very bad taste.
I didn't think
Not
it was
to
in
mention
bad
a violation of privacy.
Whose privacy?
Our privacy, the family's privacy.
It's funny. I had a producing teacher who had a phrase which was only the good, which is that if anyone asks you how things going on your movie, you only tell them the good stuff. And there's a reason for this, which is you're trying to raise money. You're trying to keep the morale up. You don't want to just dump. You don't want to go up to your lead actor and say, "Oh, by the way, we might have to shut down tomorrow because we're out of money."
Yeah.
You don't tell them that, because they don't need to know that. And I think there's a truth to that. For me, and I'm, as you know, fairly private and don't like to, express my emotions everywhere. But I was listening to a woman interviewed, and it was in sort of the body positivity movement. And she was saying basically that at a certain point in her life, she needed to come out of the closet of being a fat person. And that hit me in a really profound manner.
Interesting.
And so I remember, and since that point, I've always tried to say, well, I'm a fat person, like that. The idea, particularly when you're walking around heavy
Yeah.
Everyone can see that you're heavy. Like you're not hiding anything from anybody.
Yeah.
And so then people would say like, I'd say, oh, I'm dieting. And they're like, oh, you're fine. You look great. And it's like, come on. Like this is a ridiculous statement, like, fine. It's fine that you think that I look great. Yeah. And I'm just going to start saying what is an obvious truth, that I'm fat,
person. Yeah. I hear what you're saying.
And everyone has to make their own journey and their own negotiation with it. But like I think what am I going to get from not saying I'm seeing a therapist, which I have seen therapists and got a lot out of it. What am I going to get by not saying, hey, I'm sad, or not saying all that, we started at the beginning of this conversation of how hard it is to talk about these things. And it's like, well, if it's so hard to talk about it, like maybe we need to start being less afraid of talking, And so I am of two minds. Do I think, I don't know what his relationship with this woman he saw on the stairs was. They are at a public party. Maybe he could have been a little more circumspect about it. But mostly I'm like, no, Calvin needs to talk about this.
Yeah, because you won't talk about it, Beth.
Yeah.
So, and look, the woman on the steps has no problem with it. She doesn't react to it. Annie doesn't react to it in a negative way at all, and is more, matter of fact about it. And I imagine there's probably a relationship between these two that has been around for a while. And they're kind of like the truth tellers amongst these group of rigid, stick in the ass people. Yeah. And so that's why they find each other on the steps. They don't find each other in the main area. They find each other on the steps. And you and I have been to parties, Steve. We know the steps is the place you go to escape the expected places you're supposed to be at. Because you want to have those conversations with other people that you don't want other people to listen to, or about the people that you're at the party with. And so to me, I think that it's on the steps on purpose. And his body language is so relaxed. Her body language, she's turned to him. She's very relaxed in the back and forth. Like it is, I think they have, like you can intimate that they might have a relationship as friends because they're not the standard people that do this stuff like Beth,
That's my sense too. I think you don't sit down on the steps with just someone you're not interested in. Like you sit down on the steps with the person you genuinely like.
Yeah.
But needless to say, that car ride ends in some awkward silence. And we're back with Dr. Berger. And again, Timothy Hutton, it's funny watching he who came in looking for control, watching him try to control how these meetings are going to go.
Yeah.
So what do I do? Tell you my dreams?
I don't hold much stock in dreams.
Now, what kind of psychiatrist are you? They all believe in dreams.
Really?
And you could see he's jumpy. His knees are bouncing. He's, still got that uncomfortable energy.
Yeah.
And I love Judd Hirsch's response. He says,
look, kiddo, I lied. I do believe in dreams. Only sometimes I want to know what's happening when you're awake. Now, come on, something's bugging you, making you nervous. You're making me nervous.
Maybe I need a tranquilizer,
Now, this tranquilizer comes up a lot. Yeah. I think he was tranquilized at the hospital.
Oh, clearly. Yes. That's the thing that I think was a really smart decision by the movie, is we don't see Conrad in his worst states at the hospital.
Yeah.
Because I wonder if we might feel differently and put people's reactions and behaviors that we see in the movie in a completely different perspective if we saw how Conrad melted down in the hospital and what he experienced, and like the extent to which he lost it, so to speak, because what is Cuckoo's Nest? Just a few years before this movie. And we see how McMurphy does the things that he does and why, in the end, you may not like the decision, but you could see the logic in the decision, even though you may not like it,
Which decision? Sorry.
Putting him,
the chief killing McMurphy, or
or
lobotomized. There's a lot of decisions.
Oh, sorry. McMurphy being essentially lobotomized. Yes, because he was never going to stop. And they did not have any, they in order to function in that society, they had to lobotomize him in order to maintain quote unquote normalcy in that madness of a society,
I certainly that is the decision. Yeah, that is the end result of a journey of trying to create normalcy where normalcy doesn't exist. That's definitely true. I think the tranquilizer thing is, and the way I think it's talked about is that tranquilizers, it's not going to make him feel better.
No.
It's just going to make him feel less.
It's temporary too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just going to turn down the volume on all the things he doesn't want to feel.
I think he came in here looking like something out of the Body Snatchers. It's not my impression that you need a tranquilizer.
Which again, I think is great. And then there's this moment where he sees the clock and he wants to look at the clock. He's like, oh, you look at that so you know when this ends. And again, I think this is all about control for Conrad. You know, if I can control, now I can control the time.
Yep.
And then he talks about not wanting to swim.
Have you ever thought about quitting?
Are you telling me to?
No.
Again, it's this weird thing of I want control, but I want you to tell me.
Yeah, this happens throughout the whole movie, Steve. Conrad says that. Do you think I should? Do you not want to do this? Is it too much for you to pay for the sessions? If like he's trying to surrender control to everybody while also claiming he wants control, right? It's the dichotomy of his existence right now.
It wouldn't look good.
Forget about how it looks. How does it feel?
How does it feel? How does it feel?
Yes. How does it feel?
He can't even access that, how it's actually going to feel. Yeah. And I really think humans in the first 20 years of life spend so much energy trying to figure out what they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Just like, okay, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do when I go to school? What am I supposed to do at Little League practice? What am I supposed to do after school? What am I supposed to do? What fork do I use at dinner? How do I go to bed? How do I do my homework? And you're just going, if I can just do what I'm supposed to do, everything is going to be okay. And he's now at this place where things are not okay.
Yeah.
And he does not know what to do. And he's desperately, should I quit? Do you want me to quit the swim team? Will that make things okay?
Yeah.
You know?
It's the same thing that happened last year. It's the same damn thing I did last year.
Are you the same person you were last year?
I don't know.
So he was on the swim team with his brother. His brother dies.
Yeah.
He tries to kill himself. And now he's back on the swim thing.
Yeah.
I think that's a profound thing of like, my world is completely, entirely different from what it was last year.
Right.
And I'm doing the exact same damn thing I did last year.
That's why you need a tranquilizer?
You tell me.
Nope, it's up to you.
$50 an hour? Can't you decide if I should have a pill or not? I mean, you're a doctor. I'm supposed to feel better, right?
Not necessarily.
Then he says, and I find this, again, it's a really interesting thread because he talks about how hard life was.
Is any place easy?
The hospital was.
It was.
And he asks why, and he says, again, the answer is fascinating.
Because nobody hid anything there.
Which is obviously saying everybody hides everything out here.
Yes.
Was there anyone there you could talk to?
Uh-huh.
I mean, besides Dr. Crawford?
And then we have a perfect cut to him sitting in a diner. Someone taps him on the shoulder, puts their hand over his face, and there is Karen, who's played by Dinah Manoff.
Dinah Manoff, who some of you hopefully remember, was in Grease. Remember her in Grease? She is Marty, who picks up the penny that causes the problem with Kaneki and Zuko that allows for Zuko to ride in the race. And she was also a series regular on Empty Nest. Remember with Richard Mulligan, that show Empty Nest. She is the daughter of Lee Grant, the great Lee Grant, who some of you may remember as the lawyer who goes after Albert Brooks in Defending Your Life. So yeah, Dinah Manoff, fantastic actress, number of things, Blossom, Civil, what have you. And in a series State of Grace in the early 2000s as well, but fantastic actress. And this is such a small part. So this is clearly right at the beginning of her career as an actress, director, and writer. So yeah.
And she sits down and there's kind of a joyousness to her and a funness that we really haven't seen anywhere else in the movie. And then she says,
Listen, I'm not going to be able to stay a real long time. I've got a meeting over at school. Drama club meeting. We're doing 1,000 clowns this year. You know it?
So, again, we spoil everything about the movie.
Yes.
So I want to spoil what happens to Karen. Because, and it's so horrible, but I think it's important in talking about this scene, because I've been thinking about it, is that Karen is someone he was in the hospital with, who I guess probably also tried to kill themselves or had some mental health issues.
Yes.
And she is behaving as if she's doing really well.
Yes.
I'm busy. I'm happy. She's putting, and the reality is, or I don't know what the reality is, but what happens later in the film, a few months from now, is that Karen does succeed in killing herself.
She kills herself. Yeah.
And so, and in thinking about that, and then I think about this scene, is I go, she seems very okay, right?
Yeah.
what if she's not okay in this scene? Is it possible that nothing is fine for her in this scene, and that the whole like starting a meeting, a meal with an excuse to leave early is that she might not be able to handle this at all?
She 100% is lying throughout this entire meeting. And
Yeah.
I bet she's only seeing him because she felt a responsibility to go and see him. I bet she was afraid to come to this meeting and see him because she reminds him of the hospital. And she clearly doesn't have the same warm feelings about the hospital that Conrad does. And so you see that come up because she comes in, sits down, she's smiling with him and then says, like, oh, I can't stay because I'm this or this. And then she stays for a little bit. And as soon as the conversation gets difficult, she says, oh, I got to go do this. I'm the treasurer or whatever, secretary or whatever. And I've got all these. So it's all busy work for her to avoid the problems. The difference between him and her is he's actually trying to confront the problem. She is what sometimes people do who have these mental health breakdowns. She is trying so desperately to create things to not confront the problem because she's not ready to confront the problem, that when those things shatter or go away, that's when the feelings to kill yourself can come back in larger ways that overwhelm you and take you,
I think it's like to me, it's like a parallel with Conrad. And it's sort of, because I honestly think if he doesn't call Dr. Berger, there's a good chance Conrad does not survive the next year.
100%. He would have killed himself. If he does not call Dr. Berger, he would have killed himself. Yes.
And so, as we talked about at the beginning, every one of the steps, every number you dial on the phone is heavy and hard. And so at any one of those steps, if you don't take that hard step, then he doesn't make it. And so the way I think of what Karen is I think she's just like Conrad.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm sure you've done this. I know I've done this, where you are simultaneously needing to pull someone closer while pushing them away.
Yeah.
To protect yourself. And I think she went, I'm in a bad place. Everything you said about her feeling responsibility for Conrad, I agree with, and not wanting to glorify or romanticize the hospital. And that makes her uncomfortable. I totally agree with that too. But I also think part of her was like, I'm in a bad place. This guy will understand. I need him. I want to see him because that might help me. And then as soon as she gets here, she starts pushing him away with that sentence,
I could see your point of view on it. Yeah. I don't, obviously we don't have to agree on everything. I think she dreaded this, as I said earlier, but she said, I can deal with this. But as soon as she got there, she realized she couldn't. But it's very possible that what you're talking about is the approach as well. So yeah.
And then, and he talks about seeing the doctor, and then again, because this is how she took the different path.
Well, Dr. Crawford gave me a name, and I went for a while, but I don't know, just didn't work for me, I guess. He just kept telling me all the things I already knew, and finally I decided the only one who can help me is myself.
And she's so positive seeming that sounds, you kind of buy it a little bit.
Yes, you do. 100% you buy it. Yeah.
And you shouldn't. And then this next line I think is also really important because we have to fold the parents into what their attitude towards their kids means.
At least that's what my dad says.
But at least that's what my dad says. Yeah. Is like Beth,
Yeah. Right.
Like, and you should be able to solve this on your own.
Yeah, exactly. And she probably doesn't have the counter like Conrad does with Colin. The mother of Karen probably doesn't have that counter in the house to say, no, go to the doctor. We'll pay for it. We'll help you, whatever, And this idea, and people sometimes resist therapy because they go, oh, they're not telling me anything I don't want to know. That's nonsense. And I say this all the time. And people always think they're smarter than therapists or smarter than psychiatrists, yet they end up in the same places that they started over and over and over again in their lives and situations. You're clearly not smarter than the therapist and the psychiatrist because you keep falling back into the holes. The truth is, this is a process, and it took me 3 years to climb out of the first time when I was in with a therapist to understand why my friendships were falling apart in the early 2000s. And then going back again to deal with the near suicide, my friend Corey and Mark, we know them, Steve, they paid for 2 therapists because she had connections for me to go through this process. 2 therapists. And I had to confront those things and I had to go through those things in order to climb out the other side. And I had people who were supporting me through the process. Clearly, she doesn't, right? Because their parents are so caught up in appearances when the true thing is to help them confront this stuff and to give yourself over to the therapist. If it's a good therapist, right? That's important too. You got to really sense that this is a good therapist. And then you can surrender yourself. But if you quit after not finding a good one the first time around, it's because you're really not ready to confront these things yourself, And even in my process, I came close to realizing the first time around what it was, and it was my father who was the problem, and my father was dying of cancer. And that was the hardest thing to do, was to confront my father's mistakes with me at the same time that I was losing him to cancer. It was a colossal mind fuck.
Yeah.
But I had to do it, right? And not everyone wants to do it. And it can be quite difficult. And so this idea, and I think I see a lot of people who think that they're smarter than the therapists and they end up in the same place down the road,
Well, and it's messy.
Yes.
I mean, like you dealing with that at the time that your father had cancer couldn't be any messier. That's just, there's no simple way to work through those feelings. It's all going to be complicated and shitty. And I actually think the Karen Conrad contrast, it sort of is exactly the point I was making, which is that Conrad is trying to present an image that he's okay to the world, and he's not as successful.
Right.
Karen is more successful at presenting the image that she's okay than Conrad is.
Right.
And she is, in fact, more fucked up.
Who presented the greatest image that he was okay and loving life?
Buck.
Robin Williams.
Oh, Robin Williams, sure.
Never in a million years
Yep.
would you have guessed that Robin Williams would take his life. And of course it was the disease that he had contracted, but clearly this was a man who constantly showed you how happy he was. And people say this who have been through this process. The happiest people are the ones you need to watch the most because they're playing the role for you, but underneath there's much more going on, like at 3 a.m. in the morning, when there's no audience. And that's the hardest part.
And that's really what's happening then, because as you said, he starts talking wistfully about the hospital.
Yeah.
And that makes her uncomfortable. And so she's suddenly cutting the meeting short to go off for her 1,000 clowns, whatever. But then she's doing exactly what you described, which is like, she's trying to make Conrad happy.
Yeah.
She's going,
Conrad, let's have a great Christmas. Let's have a great year. Let's have the best year of our whole lives, okay? We can, This could be the best year ever.
you can feel her. Yeah. I'm a positive person, pushing my positive energy into you,
She's trying to enlist him in her delusions.
Yes. And then even like saying it kind of loudly.
Yeah.
That pulls the attention of the diners as she's exiting. And it is super weird. It's super awkward, frankly.
Hey! Would you cheer up?
That's the moment where I realized, like, she is not well at all.
So he's out on the sort of, chaise lounge or whatever in the yard, and mom is watching him through the window, and the music starts as she comes outside, and you can feel the trepidation of her going to talk to him.
Yeah.
Because frankly, she's scared of him.
It's cold out here. You should put that on, or do you want a sweater?
Do I need one?
Ugh. And it's like, they're each trying to like please the other and do what they're supposed to do.
I was thinking about the pigeon, the one that used to hang around the garage, and how he used to get on top of your car and he'd take off when you pulled out of the driveway.
Oh yeah, I remember.
And she laughs as she remembers this story and how scary it was. And it's the closest to a moment of connection I think they have in the whole movie, frankly. Yeah. And he says, this is so sad, he says,
yeah, That was the closest we ever came to having a pet.
Like some pigeon that hung out in your garage is the closest you had to having a pet is sad.
Yeah, that's true.
And then what happens, and it's hard to describe, but is that they both tell two parallel stories, essentially.
Yeah.
Which is one is there was some dog from a neighbor, from Mr. McGarry, who they thought about adopting. And he is saying that there was some retriever down the street for sale, and that's what he wanted. And she can't hear what he's saying.
Right.
And all she hears is rejecting anything about a pet.
Yeah.
In the middle of this, that builds sort of chaotically. We go from their closest moment of connection to Conrad just barking.
That animal next door, that Pepper or Pippin, whatever his name
Pippin.
is not a very friendly dog. I don't care what Mr. McGreary says.
What he really
He's
wanted
really
was the
not.
retriever that was down the street for
and
sale.
every time
That's
that
what he
dog
wanted,
comes
the
into this
retriever.
backyard and I try to get him out,
It's a fully, from Beth's perspective, my son just did something entirely insane. You know?
Right.
And from his perspective, it's, you're not fucking listening to me.
Yeah.
Why can't you hear me? Why does everything have to be perfect in your world? And why? So maybe I'll bark like a dog.
Why do you have to tell me my truth? Why do you have to make me have your truth? You know, and why don't you just listen to me? That's all he's doing here. Is I just want you to listen to me. If she hadn't said a word and just stared at him or shook her head or smiled as he's talking, that would have been enough. Sometimes we forget that people just want to be heard, you know? And so in that moment, that's what he's trying to do. And she's the one who asked him, what are you thinking about? She's the one that pressed him. And then he says, I was thinking about the pigeon and who would sit on the top of the roof. And she does remember it. And so she's there for the moment, in that moment, like with him in the memory. Although she feels a bit, it looks like from her face, like a bit unsettled that that's what he was thinking about. I think she maybe thought he was thinking about something more profound. And then it becomes the argument of the dog. And she's trying to talk over him because she wants to construct the narrative that he needs to be repeating. And he won't do it. So in a desperate attempt, he does the barking in a way to make fun of her, in a way, push back and rebel, but also to be like, as you said, Steve, listen to me.
Yeah.
You know,
just pay attention.
She is, of course, pushed back by it. Yeah.
Well, because people are not supposed to behave that way, John. Just normal people do not just start barking.
Well, don't tell the Arsenio Hall audience because they whooped it up all the time.
Well, that show did get canceled. I'm not saying that's a coincidence. I think, I mean, the first thing is when your kid says that was the closest, you gotta recognize the clues, man. When someone says that was the closest I ever came to having a pet, you should pay attention to that. Like, oh, there's a thing here. And then the other thing, and then this is just like an important life lesson, is that because you like something a certain way does not make that right. It makes it, that's how you like it.
Yeah.
She has a perfect, if you asked her why this family shouldn't have a pet, she would have perfectly reasonable explanations for why that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And she thinks that's right. And so there's no reason to discuss retrievers that were for sale down the street or anything else because that's not right, obviously.
But I also think she, in a way, connects this to what she thinks they see her as, which is a failure as a mother.
Sure.
I never got you a pet. So now you're going to blame me for that. Yeah. So
the reason, well, and this is the thing about, you know, talk about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is his attempted suicide.
Yes.
And so everything has to come back to, I mean, if my son tried to kill themselves and then later said, we never had a pet, my first reaction is, oh, so me not getting you a pet is why you tried to kill yourself. You know,
Yeah.
Like that's always got to be sitting there.
Yeah.
You know, and Calvin in this film, at least to some degree, is engaging in his guilt and sense of responsibility.
Yes.
And Beth is just rejecting that.
Yes.
Like I can't go. There's so many times where she says things like, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't do that. There's just
this increases as the film goes along from this point forward. You're right, Steve. Yeah.
It's like, I can't go there. Yeah. So he barks at her. She has no idea how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And then we go back to what started the scene, which is him saying, you know, are you cold? Should I put on a sweater? Do you want me to put on a sweater? And then finally she tells him what he should do.
Put that on if you're going to stay out here, okay?
And he's alone, and he nods to himself. And that nod is just like, for me, a confirmation of everything I thought about my mother, and my relationship with my mother is true.
Yeah.
All the terrible things I thought.
100%.
All of these characters have complex struggles that they're dealing with in the course of this movie. But the central struggle, I think, or one of the central struggles, is Beth and her son and their inability to connect.
100%. That is the core of this movie. Because in her mind, if we were to see Beth's perspective of, like, if Beth was to walk through that glass door after she's given the sweater and we were one of her friends, she would be like, I don't know what else to do. I went out there to talk to him. I brought him out a sweater because I was afraid he might be cold. I'm a mom. I love him. That's my symbol of love.
And he barked at me.
When he tried to tell me what my truth was, and then he barked at me.
Yeah.
Right. And so you see that there is this tragic fracture between them.
Yep.
It can't be mended. Yeah.
And I think at the moment of this fracture is a good time to end part one of our exploration of ordinary people. Part of me was like, maybe this will be a one-parter. I didn't have a lot of pre-production. Like, this is a lot of heavy stuff in here.
There is, yeah.
So we'd love to hear your heavy thoughts about our discussion, and maybe about some of the themes that you saw. And maybe you saw some of these characters differently, because there is a lot of ambiguity in this film. So you could visit us on our Facebook page. Just do a search for the Cine-Files. It's Cine_Files on Twitter. It's the Cine-Files podcast on Instagram. Of course, we'd love to hear your comments there. As we said at the beginning of the show, the best way for you to support us, other than clicking on those links to some of our sponsors, is by either subscribing on Apple Podcasts, where you can get ad-free versions of the show and our shorts, or at the many tiers available at patreon.com/thecine-files, which include our advisory board, the schedule for every month, our watch-alongs. You can buy or stream Ordinary People along with every other film we've ever reviewed on cinephiles.net. And if you want to reach me, it's SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. John, how would people reach you?
You can always reach me at The Rocha Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, The Outlaw Nation on Twitch, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Rocha Says, and my other podcasts, the Hot Mic and the Geek Buddies, and soon the Jedi Way, which will have its own feed very soon as well. And we do want to say, Steve, as we wrap up this first part, for anyone, is if we've touched on some things that have triggered things for anyone, because this is a very strong film about mental health, please reach out. There are numbers, there are websites you can go to. If you know anyone who's in pain, make sure you encourage them to reach out to professionals or to people who run these organizations like BetterHelp that help people deal with the pain and the mental health breakdowns that are happening out there. So please don't be afraid to do that. We both can't encourage you enough.
And for anyone who's struggling out there, 988 is the suicide hotline number in the United States. There are people waiting there to talk. There's help available. So definitely, if you're feeling anything like that or worried about someone, definitely take advantage of those resources. And I think that is it for this week. We will see you next time to continue our exploration of ordinary people right here on the Cine-Files.